The Diamondbacks have agreed to deals with all of their arbitration eligible players for 2026. We will talk about that, the winners and losers of that situation, as well as one sleeper prospect to keep an eye on this episode of the dbacks Under Review podcast. And welcome back to another dbacks Under Review podcast. I am your host, Mike McDermott, the founder and publisher of the dbacks Under Review newsletter. So opening things up, before we get into the intro topic today, I'd like to thank everyone that's been watching here. Like I said, we're on episode 12. We started this thing about a month ago, and we have talked a lot about the Diamondbacks, even though we've been enduring a slow offseason, and I've been kind of, I guess you say in a way, kind of not prioritizing my newsletter, which you can find at dbacks_underreview.com. And also, again, as we get into the new year, and hopefully the market picks up soon and we have stuff to talk about, because as you notice, I only have 2 topics. We kind of blew our wad this week, and unfortunately I accidentally published an extra episode this week because I lost track of which day of the week it was. These days just blend because I'm functionally basically just a baseball degenerate that doesn't do anything other than write, eat, sleep, and shower. But anyways, before we get into the arbitration deals and all the takeaways from it, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and hit that notification bell so that way the next time an episode uploads, that YouTube will hopefully notify you. I know for a fact, looking into my analytics, that there are people that click on the video when they get the notification, so I know it's working. So again, coming into the 12th episode since we started the dbacks Under Review, the podcast of the newsletter. We've grown from 20 subscribers up to 61. We're over 60, so we're going to try and close in on the 500 and then hopefully add more content as the channel gets bigger. So, getting into our opening topic here. So, January 8th served as the filing deadline for arbitration eligible players. The Diamondbacks entered the offseason with 10. They actually released 2 of them long before the non-tender deadline. So, Ildemaro Vargas was at 5 years. Diamondbacks, I think it was in the case of Vargas' contract mandated as such, but Ildemaro Vargas and Kyle Nelson were 2 arbitration eligible players that were bumped off the roster at the end of the season. Both of them hit free agency. The Diamondbacks re-signed Vargas, and then unclear what's happening with Kyle Nelson, although I would say his skill set is very replicable in the organization, because the Diamondbacks have 2 guys in AAA that have 90 with sliders, between Spencer GC and Yumin Lin if they wanted to go that route. So, but anyways, instead of talking about guys that haven't thrown a pitch at the major leagues, let's talk about guys that have been in the major leagues for at least 3 years. So the Diamondbacks have 8 arbitration eligible players in the 2026 offseason after the Vargas and Nelson move. And obviously, for the 3rd straight year, no drama on the arbitration filing deadline. The Diamondbacks have agreed to 1-year deals with all 8 of their arbitration eligible players on the 40-man roster. And we'll pull up the list. Fortunately, I compiled that on Heavy Sports. Again, if you want to check out my content on the Diamondbacks, the coverage I've done on Diamondbacks of late, you can go to heavy.com/MLB/Arizona Diamondbacks. So Arizona-Diamondbacks in the URL. So we can go find Diamondbacks content on Heavy Sports. So I am going to pull it up because I gives myself a click, and plus I have the numbers in that one. So reading off the salaries, which you can do if you're reading the article: AJ Puck, $3.1 million; Ryan Thompson, $3.95 million; Kevin Ginkel, $2.725 million; Pavin Smith, $2.25; Alec Thomas, $1.9625; Jake McCarthy, $1.525; and Gabriel Moreno, $2.55; and Ryan Nelson, $3 million. Of course, all these numbers are in the millions. We're not sure. So when looking at the thing, and I mentioned the takeaways in the article, again, the Diamondbacks have only been to 3 hearings since Hazen took over in 2017. Shelby Miller in 2018, the pitcher ended up winning, but then the Diamondbacks won the hearings against Archie Bradley and Josh Rojas. But since the Rojas hearing, the Diamondbacks have not gone to arbitration hearing, and in the last 3 years they have settled all their arbitration cases on the filing deadline. Because the Diamondbacks, the team, are a file then trial. So if they have to exchange figures, they just go straight to trial. And for another year, there's no exchanging of figures. So I find it interesting, like I said, the Diamondbacks picture that the players that they got the biggest savings on were Jake McCarthy, who came in at $375,000 less than his projected estimate of $1.9 million. Ryan Nelson came $300,000 short of his projected number of $3.3, followed by Kevin Ginkel at $275,000 below his arbitration estimate of $3 million. And another big one was Alek Thomas at, this is a tough number to calculate in my head, but $2.375. $237,500 difference. I am a math wizard, but it takes a little bit of time. If you could punch it into a calculator, you could probably beat me half the time. But anyways, the two players that ended up overperforming their estimate were Thompson. He beat it by 50K, so that's not really anything. Moreno had the biggest overperformance. There is a bit of a dispute on Moreno's numbers. Picoro's piece has $2.525 million, whereas Francis Romero's report was $2.55, and that's what I put in the article. I mean, the difference is $25,000. It's a pretty insignificant amount. But considering the fact that we had 6 players come in under the estimate, 4 of them well below their estimate. More than $200,000 below their estimate. I was going to say Payton Smith's at $150K below, but that's not the significant number we're going under. So Diamondbacks had 6 players underperform their estimate. Nelson was the only player of the 6 that I think, or maybe it was a case that he felt like $3 million was a good number because he signed the deal, he agreed to the deal. Nelson was the only player who ended up settling for less than his projected number that actually played well in 2025. I mean, if you read down the list, Puck pitched 7 games before needing elbow surgery. Kevin Ginkel has bookended the season with shoulder injuries, wasn't particularly effective between the 2 injuries. Payton Smith had a hot start and then kind of slumped for 3 months, and then injuries ended his season. Alek Thomas had a career year offensively, and it's still not very good. Jake McCarthy had a really ugly 2025 season, lost center field job to Thomas, who didn't necessarily want it through his own merit, kind of just had it by default. But it was pretty interesting. McCarthy coming back from Reno actually put up some pretty decent quality contact metrics that improved. Like I think I've cited it before, a 260 expected batting average and a 405 expected slug, which if McCarthy were to sustain moving forward, would actually make him a superior offensive option to Thomas. Because the value in the glove between the 2 outfielders is about the same. McCarthy makes more plays on range, but he has a bad arm. And then Thomas, I forget what the numbers are on Thomas when it comes to DRS, but Thomas's outfield defense in the OAA and DRS metrics have been declining every year since he came up. And I was going to say, it bit the Diamondbacks in the World Series, Thomas's defense. It did. Although I would say at that point the series was kind of over, and the defensive miscue just turned what was going to be a close loss into a laugher situation. It turned a high leverage game into a low leverage game. And of course, Moreno was the big overperformance, but Moreno had some quality contact metrics that were kind of glossed over because of the injuries, and Moreno missing 2 months with the hairline fracture in his right hand. But the thing I mentioned, and Moreno is a breakout candidate. I wrote as such. Of course, Steve Gilbert picked him first, and I kind of went the next step on that one. And we talked about Moreno as a breakout candidate a couple episodes ago. But if you look at the Moreno's quality contact, he had a career high in hard hit rate, so that's 95 plus mile an hour exit velocities. Barrel rate, where you have the exit velocities, you got to hit at least 98, I think is the minimum number. Where you combine exit velocity and premium exit velocity launch angle for extra base hits and home runs. Pulled air percent, because is another metric that's indicative of future slug. Moreno set a career high. He almost doubled his 2024 rate. He went from 8% to almost 15%. And you look at Moreno's plate discipline numbers, there's a little bit of... he's also cut down the chase and the whiff rates. So you have a disciplined hitter with improving quality contact metrics. It's just a matter of Moreno staying healthy. And I feel like the Diamondbacks were willing to go a little bit above the projected number. But when you add everything up, because all the arbitration eligible players kind of had a bad year going into this offseason, except for Nelson, it was a good chance the Diamondbacks would save a significant chunk of change, and they did. The difference between Matt Swartz's estimate on MLB trade rumors and what the Diamondbacks ultimately signed for was a little bit less than 1.4 million. It was like 1.38 or so, which is relatively insignificant compared to the total payroll. It's less than 1%. Although, depending on how you can spend that extra 1.4 million, that could make a minor difference. I don't know. That's a little less than 2 minimum salary players in this league. If you look at 1.4 million, that'd be, I guess you can say 1.9 seasons of a minimum salary player in Major League Baseball. But I'll have to double check the numbers, but I believe that knocks the Diamondbacks CBT payroll down to 204. And I'm not sure what their final number will be. So I'm going to pull it up on Roster Resource. Of course, they always default to the Padres for some reason. So Diamondbacks, after the arbitration stuff, their estimated luxury tax payroll on Roster Resource, which you can find by going to fangraphs.com. There's a Roster Resource drop-down menu if you're on the laptop. I'm not sure how to do Fangraphs on mobile because, from what I've heard, Fangraphs is not very mobile-friendly. So you would go to the payroll pages and you click on Arizona, which is the leftmost thing. So, interesting. They haven't updated on Puck, so even though the numbers are known. So Diamondbacks, once you factor in Puck's difference, they have Puck at 3.3. The number we know for sure is 3.1. So Diamondbacks are at 204,586,455 towards the luxury tax on Roster Resource. Cott's contracts also does payroll. We'll just pull it up. Diamondbacks are sitting at, so Cott's has the Diamondbacks at 160.8 million on their 2026 payroll and 203.6 million on their 40-man payroll. Towards the luxury tax. So 203.6, the difference is like $1 million between the two. Because when you go through the offseason, Cots and Roster Resource use different numbers. Cots has their own numbers for arbitration eligible players, whereas Roster Resource uses Swartz's model for arbitration eligible players. So Diamondbacks are currently, so their 2026 payroll is just under $167 million. And their CBT payroll is at $204.5 million. So the Diamondbacks don't have much space to spend, believe it or not. If we take Ken Kendrick's words seriously from September, and this was from September 30th, this was something written by Alex Weiner of Arizona Sports. So when Kendrick came on Burns and Gambo that day, he mentioned that the Diamondbacks are unlikely to field a CBT payroll of $220 million. So if you take that number, you subtract Diamondbacks' current number, that gives them about $15.5 million if they're not repeating that number. So that might actually be the bare minimum the Diamondbacks need to do in order to finish their offseason if we're talking just signing free agents, where you get your bullpen guy, or let's say you get Dominguez for the projected MLB trade rumors contract of $218 million. And I think Fangraphs has them at $220 on their free agent tracker. So both are very useful things. If you ever catch my writing on free agents for heavy sports, and I do more than just the Diamondbacks, because the Diamondbacks aren't drawing much traffic, unfortunately. And that's partially my fault. And when I say partially my fault, it's because I started something 3 years ago, and it's become a go-to website. I'm too good. But unfortunately, I can't recreate the same dynamic, so. Rambling aside, going to relief pitchers, the biggest ones left are Justin Wilson, but Wilson's not a back-end guy necessarily. You won't want to use him as a closer. The closest closer candidate that fits the Diamondbacks need that's healthy, I would say, and I put the healthy qualifier in there because Shelby Miller's a free agent, is Sir Anthony Dominguez. And Dominguez is at 2-16 on Fangraphs, which if the Diamondbacks could pull off would be impressive. So if you get Dominguez for $8 to $9 million on your payroll, then you got the first base situation. And I still feel like Paul Goldschmidt is the optimal Pavin Smith platoon partner at first base. And if you have Smith, that's if you're going with Pavin Smith at first base. And then Goldschmidt would serve as your Pavin Smith will start against righties. Goldschmidt would bat against lefties because you want to try and shield the matchups for both players as much as you can. Goldschmidt's numbers against righties aren't very good the last 3 years, and Smith has never really hit lefties in his major league career. So you kind of figure that in there. I think if Smith can at least repeat his 2025 numbers, albeit with a little less, with smaller peaks and valleys, you'll take that number, which is 127 WRC plus. I think against right-handers it should be higher because Smith doesn't give you competitive bats against lefties. Like I said, Smith had if you go to Smith's player page on Baseball Reference and you go to advanced stats, there is a platoon rate when you get to the situational stats. But we're not going to do that. We're going to pull up the splits on Fangraphs on Pavin Smith. And again, at the end of the day, even though it doesn't feel that way, Smith had against the righties, had a 265, 361, 456 slash, which is good for a 127 WRC plus. And the only real downside to these numbers is Smith had a strikeout rate of 31%, which, if he maintains that number, I don't think he's going to hit 265 against right-hand pitching, and Smith needs to put up an 800 plus OPS against right-hand pitching to stick around at first base through his final 2 control years, but I could be wrong. But yeah, if his strikeout rate were at 21.4%, I don't think we'd be talking about Pavin Smith's job at all. So, and then also the 31% strikeout rate versus right-hand pitching in 2025 needs to be considered an outlier until proven otherwise. Of course, the metrics will obviously back that up, but if you look at his whiff rates are in the toilet. There's a lot of swing and miss. His chase rates are pretty good, but his whiff rate sucks. On his StatCast page, I think he's in the 6th percentile for whiff rate. So then you pair up Pavin Smith with a right-hand bat of Goldschmidt. That's your first base situation, your first base platoon. That's kind of how it is. Now, Diamondbacks could certainly go down the bargain bin and try and see if they can get a deal done with maybe a short-term deal. You look at Wilmer Flores maybe, but Flores to me is a minor league deal, and they already reportedly agreed to a minor league deal. I haven't checked the transaction. I'll check the transaction wire real quick. There's nothing on the Diamondbacks signing of Luke and Baker. In fact, the Diamondbacks transaction page, Diamondbacks last transaction is dated to December 24th, and it has nothing to do with the first baseman. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. If the Baker thing goes through, I wouldn't be surprised. Falls through, like with Urquidy. But that's hopefully we'll get some movement on those 2 particular needs, and maybe the Diamondbacks also. I wouldn't be surprised also if they leverage either Thomas or McCarthy now that they're cheaper than their arbitration estimates are for the Schwartz model. Cheaper by a significant number. I don't know if that'll necessarily affect their trade value that much, but for a controllable player with question marks, I think maybe it does. But anyways, moving on from the Major League roster to the Diamondbacks farm system. So one thing that I noticed, it's that and this was something that I noticed on Baseball America. Baseball America published a list of sleepers for the 30 MLB organizations, and I did catch a whiff of who their pick for the Diamondbacks was before the paywall went up. But when you refresh the page, that sometimes happens on a paywall post. You might get a whiff of what was there before it comes up. Although I'll have to check the numbers on Baseball America. If the YouTube channel blows up, I might consider a subscription. But Baseball America's pick for the sleeper prospect in the Arizona Diamondbacks is also a guy I would pick as the sleeper prospect in the Diamondback system, Ashton Izzy, who the Diamondbacks picked up in the Josh Naylor trade along with Brandon Garcia, who I think is a future back-end reliever. So like I said, the Diamondbacks are going to get more out of the Josh Naylor trade than the Mariners than they did with Suarez. I'll be surprised if the Diamondbacks get... I wouldn't be surprised in the Suarez trade the most useful player ends up being Hunter Cranton. Because you get a middle reliever, up, down arm, and Burgos. Maybe he finds some consistency and he's a setup man. Cranton's going to be a potential back-end weapon because he's got that fastball, deathball slider combo. That rising fastball, deathball slider. But Cranton didn't throw a pitch after getting traded. I'm not sure what his injury situation is necessarily. Maybe I'll get to the bottom of that. Maybe I won't. He's definitely on my short list of guys if I can get a hold of in Double-A next year. So, and then also Ashton Izzy's another. So Izzy's kind of an interesting case. He doesn't have a blow-by-you fastball. I think he sits 94 miles an hour. I wrote a scouting report, real small report on the guy when the Diamondbacks traded him on my Substack. I might have to look for it real quick. But the thing that is interesting about Izzy is he's got a very deep arsenal of pitches. And it's not just, the fastball is probably his weakest offering, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if you have a deep arsenal of pitches. So you have the cutter, curveball, slider, changeup as well in his mix of pitches. And unfortunately, I don't have it. But a lot of it has to do with, and we'll have to see what the numbers look like. If Izzy pitches in the spring breakout game, we should have a better idea of how his pitches move and the spin rates, velocity numbers would translate into Arizona. Because when you get to Double-A to Triple-A, there is a bit of a difference in how the ball's put together. The seams are wound tighter, and you play with the big league ball in Triple-A as opposed to the minor league ball when you go from A ball, high A, Double-A. And the Diamondbacks certainly have a lot of data on Izzy. They've been probably scouting him since they've been scouting him probably since he popped onto the pitching circuit before his draft, but obviously post-draft, the Diamondbacks and the Mariners have all their minor league affiliates in the same league, so the Diamondbacks certainly have seen a lot of Ashton Izzy. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was part of the demand. All right. Oh, I actually do have his numbers here. So yeah, so the numbers. Unfortunately, I think I put this behind the paywall on my Substack, but I'll reveal it here anyway. So four-seamer 94.5 with 16 and 7. Sinker, slider, sweeper, and a changeup. And it's worth noting that there's a difference between a slider and a sweeper shape. I wonder if that's without knowing the arm angle, that could be just a curveball, but typically a pitch with close to zero induced vertical break with an insane amount of glove side movement typically gets flagged as a sweeper. And in Dre Jameson's case in the Arizona Fall, it was kind of on the fence when I was charting his pitches manually, which is really silly for someone who doesn't have a lot of time. But like I said, a deep arsenal of pitches. He gets a lot of horizontal movement on his sweeper and his changeup, slider. It's decent amount of glove side movement. Almost has kind of like a cutter type break when you talk about sweep on the pitch. So it's only at 2.4. Of course, these are projected numbers. I don't think those are the exact numbers they have at the minor league ball. That's my projection in the major league ball. But with the it's a case of if Izzy can command the strike zone, I think he might add a cutter to his arsenal depending on where he goes with the slider. That might give him a bridge pitch between the four-seamer and the slider. I think he's a guy who could have a deep arsenal. You're talking about a mid-rotation starter. I kind of have the same long-term grade on Izzy, Egan, and Hageman as number 3s. Although Hageman certainly, I think, has the most upside of the 3 pitchers and the best chance of at least being a 2. And of course, sometimes you wonder what it's like. I'm throwing out 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and sometimes I should talk about the thing. But obviously, number 2 is a guy, a qualified league starter, so we're talking 165 plus innings with a ERA plus. Well, I guess we can get the park just ERA of at least 115 in my mind, or a 3-star for me is like 2.5 to 3 WAR as well, versus a 2 is like 3 to 4, and a number 1 is 4 plus. That's kind of how I see it. Although interestingly enough, when I talk about 1, I think my grade for 1-star is like a 65. 65 feature value, 2 is a 60. And of course, if you go through the grades on the prospects before I make another jump, obviously that's something I should explain on a slow weekend, maybe next week. We talk about, because you have to talk, because the grades are based on a population curve where each standard deviation is a full grade, with 50 being the major league average or median. I think we can use median in this case because StatCast has percentile strats, and there are websites that do the percentile stuff that are on the public-facing side, like Prospect Savant. That's one place. And I'll have to pull it up. I think Izzy doesn't have StatCast data because the Cal League doesn't have it, the Northwest League doesn't have it, and the Southern League doesn't have it. Or at least public-facing data. We just have, for the Diamondbacks and Mariners organization, we just have AAA. Although, I'm not sure what the data revolution in Major League Baseball is going to be necessarily. Does that mean public-facing data in the lower minors? I don't know. But if it does, then that means I can write better prospect reports in general. And that'd be pretty interesting to cover instead of trying to piece things together when you have a farm director. I think. Well, I've never actually talked to the farm director. I definitely have listened to and things that he said before, but certainly farm execs are hyping up their guys a little bit. And so, but you do learn some things when you talk to them. But like I said, so Diamondbacks 3 pitching prospects of consequence are, like I said, Daniel Egan, Ashton Izzy, David Hageman. All of them should be in Amarillo in June. So that if you're making any plans and you want to see future Diamondbacks before they make their Major League debut, that's certainly an option. Midsummer option, head to the Texas Panhandle and see what the best pitching the Diamondbacks can offer is. But that's more or less what I have to say on the topic. So again, thank you everyone for listening in. Like I said, a little bit shorter episode, although I guess under the 30 minutes isn't necessarily a bad thing. Again, if you enjoyed the content, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and when you subscribe, make sure to turn the bell notifications, either personalized or all, so that when YouTube notifies you when the next podcast episode drops. Like I said, we're planning for the next episode to be Monday. Hopefully something happens. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't. I would think that the Ketel Marte situation is going to come up a little bit. Like I said, this is the first week out from the Christmas, New Year break. So maybe we've got the hit me with your OBO, last chance, and if nothing happens, nothing happens. Of course, we don't know what's going on because the Cardinals firing of Jonathan Gannon has dominated the airwaves in Arizona, as well as the Suns kind of hanging around too. That's kind of the Arizona topics, as well as the Fiesta Bowl that just happened. Those are the different things. So again, for now, Michael McDermott, I am signing off until the next episode. Have a good rest of your day.